The South Pole in the Antarctic and the Northwest Passage in the Arctic are both amongst the last unknown places to be explored by mankind on Earth. Many explorers lost their lives in their endeavors to be the first person to break barriers and hoist their flag after the perilous journey of the unknown. Their stories were left untold, as they never survived the barriers of reaching these dangerously cold and remote areas of planet Earth. Roald Amundsen has the dual credit of being the first explorer in breaking these geographical barriers and boldly go where no man has ever gone before. His name has been written in history in golden words. He is the national hero of Norway, and his story is a perfect example of mankind's courage and determination to break the barriers and achieve the once impossible. Born on July 16, 1872 into a family of sailors, Amundsen had always been fascinated by the stories of famous explorers and how they overcame obstacles during their expeditions. His role model was John Franklin, an explorer famous for the tragic Northwest Passage expedition that left no survivors. Amundsen's dream was to become a sailor and explore the famous Northwest Passage, a sea route that connected the Arctic and the Pacific Oceans. His mother pressurized him to study medicine and become a doctor. Following his mother's wishes, he studied medicine until his mother died in 1897. After her death, he decided to pursue his dreams to go on his first expedition, the Belgian Antarctic Expedition. This expedition's goal was to spend winters in the Antarctic waters and conduct various scientific experiments. Amundsen attended this expedition as a first mate on the ship. The ship Belgica was used in the expedition. Soon the crew realized that they were poorly equipped for the trip. They lacked food and warm clothing and were forced to improvise. They were forced to kill penguins and seals along the way for food and warm clothing. Some members on the expedition lost their sanity while imagining being imprisoned in an endless sea of ice. One man had even jumped overboard, claiming that he was going back to Belgium. The expedition's physician, Dr. Frederick Cook, was able to cure their scurvy by making sure they ate fresh meat. They finally reached Antarctic waters on January 20, 1898. Here they discovered the Belgica Strait, now called the Gerlache Strait. In February, the ship became locked in ice and they were unable to free it. The ship then drifted with the ice for 13 months, and on March 14, 1899, the ship emerged from the ice channel. Amundsen gained valuable experience in breaking barriers for survival in extreme cold weather, rough seas, and challenges of the unknown. This paved the way for him to overcome greater challenges and head his own expeditions. In 1903, Amundsen purchased a small ship, Joa, and led the Northwest Passage expedition with a crew of 6 people. The main goal of this expedition was to prove that the magnetic North Pole had been moving since its discovery in 1831. For 2 winters, Amundsen and his crew dedicated themselves to conducting magnetic and meteorological observations. After conducting these observations, they were able to prove that the pole had been moving since its discovery, which was of huge scientific significance. During their time in Joa Haven, Amundsen also became friends with the local Inuit Indians living there. The Inuits taught Amundsen and his crew vital knowledge and survival skills that would prove useful on the South Pole expedition. These tips included harnessing of dog sleds, building igloos, kayaking, hunting for seals, fishing, and materials that would be best suited against the cold. The Joa set sail once more on August 13, 1905, when Amundsen decided to follow his childhood hero, John Franklin's original route, on to the Bering Strait. When Amundsen encountered a whaling ship from San Francisco coming in the opposite direction, he knew he broke the geographical barrier of the Northwest Passage. Despite this big achievement, the original motive of commercial shipping through the Northwest Passage was still out of reach, as bigger ships were not able to use Amundsen's route.
So, the Northwest Passage is just an obsession, I guess you could call it. Certainly for the British it was an obsession. And it had a commercial premise, you'll get ships through to the Orient faster. But I think it was evident fairly soon that that was not really practical. And that just made it more fascinating to them, being the British. So the challenges of it, the physical challenges of it, the psychological challenges of getting through, which required several seasons. All of that added up to a wonderful theater, sort of like the space race.
The early 20th century was the heroic age of the golden era of exploration. There was national pride behind explorers racing to be the first to hoist their national flags in the last frontiers of unexplored territories. There were many barriers that made these endeavors almost impossible, such as extreme temperatures, limited means of communication, and challenges to human endurance. On June 3, 1910, Amundsen started an expedition with a crew of 5 men on a ship called Fram to reach the North Pole. However, after learning that the North Pole had already been reached by 2 American explorers, Frederick Cook and Robert Peary, he quickly changed the goal of the expedition to the South Pole. Another British explorer, Robert S. Scott, was also determined to be the first explorer to reach the South Pole. Scott had tried before to reach the South Pole, but his men had fallen ill and were forced to turn back. He recruited men from his original voyage and secured a grant. His ship, Terra Nova, set sail on June 15, 1910. Scott was serving in the British Navy and selected his crew based on ranks. His expedition was supported by the British government, was better funded, and consisted of 17 men, Manchurian ponies, and motorized sleds. Their clothes were made from wool and rubberized fabric. In contrast, Amundsen's expedition was on a low budget, secretive, consisted of 5 men, 52 huskies, and used lighter sleds. His crew's clothes were made from dog fur as it would keep them warm even if it was wet. He chose a base camp much closer to the South Pole, but it had mountains in the way. He also started the journey 3 weeks early to utilize more hours of sunlight. He used many skills that he learnt from the Inuits, like skiing rather than walking, using harnessed dogs to pull the sleds and climb mountains, and used them as a source of fresh meat. His crew had experience in working in sub-zero temperatures. They also had much higher rations per person on his crew, and his team was selected based on skill set requirements rather than rank.
Coming from England, it's not natural for us to use skis in this country. We hardly ever have enough snow. But Amundsen, coming from Norway, he would think of that first. And I think in that field he had an advantage.
Amundsen sent a short telegram to Scott when he changed course to the South Pole, which sparked a race between the two. Amundsen's crew reached the Antarctic first and started their trek on January 14, 1911. They averaged about 20 miles a day. Scott's ponies died early on, and his men were forced to pull the sleds, which was slower than the competition. After a long, perilous journey, Amundsen planted the Norwegian flag on December 14, 1911, at the geographic South Pole, marking their great achievement. They returned to their base camp on January 25, 1912. Scott finally reached the South Pole on January 17, 1912, and was disappointed to learn that Amundsen had beaten him in the race to the South Pole by almost 5 weeks. On the return journey, due to exhaustion and hunger, Scott's entire expedition party died before reaching the base camp. The details of Scott's expedition were found later in his journal.
Antarctica was set aside by the Antarctic Treaty as a continent for research. There's no other place on the face of the earth that is set aside solely for research. And Amundsen helps open the door to the possibility that man can go to this continent. That is a utopia for all types of scientific research: biology, geology, paleontology, zoology, astrophysics, you name it. It's an amazing continent, and Amundsen showed us that we can get to the interior of the continent.
Amundsen received worldwide fame with this achievement. He continued his career of exploration by going on other expeditions such as the Northeast Passage and aerial expeditions over the North Pole. Sadly, Amundsen lost his life in June of 1928 while trying to save another explorer in an aviation accident. Even today, Amundsen is considered to be one of the most successful explorers of all time. He inspired the next generation of explorers and provided them with the courage to break the barriers of the unknown and achieve the once impossible. He broke through many scientific and geographical barriers throughout his lifetime and even earned himself the nickname as the last Viking.